The religious are really impressed with bad ideas, but none so bad as the existence of the biblical Jesus. So why does it fail? Let's take a look. Cornelius Jones is really happy with himself that he thinks he's proven that Jesus must have existed, when in fact he's done nothing of the sort. And this is why I keep pointing out that the religious rationalize their way to their beliefs, not arrive with rational, logical, or evidence-based reasons. So let's see what he's so impressed with, and why, as usual, he shouldn't be.
What is up, my YouTube family? Here's Cornelius Jones, and I'm coming in right now. I just wanted to put down a very quick video today.
Okay, first off, what is it with people recording in their cars? I don't get it. I think Bionic Dance calls these people car theists, which I think is pretty appropriate. Then again, I know that Matt Dillahunty used to record in his car too, so this clearly isn't limited to just the religious. I still don't understand the appeal, but anyway, go on.
As you all know, recently I have been just going in with the atheist community, and as of recently I've been in some debates with talking about just the existence of Jesus Christ. And on that subject, I've been doing some research, and I found out a very interesting fact.
That your entire belief system is logically indefensible? Or is that too much to ask? And I ask that because I've also been doing a lot of debating with the religious of late, and as should be no surprise, whenever their claims get shredded, they cling even harder to their blind faith because they really don't care about the truth. Because they do, as I'm sure Cornelius here will do in a moment, make irrational leaps of illogic in order to defend their pre-existing faith. They rationalize, and I don't think they understand what that is or why it's bad. But the second that you point out that what they're doing is wrong, they go quiet for a moment, then they come back and double down on the same thing you just proved was faulty in the first place. And no one should be surprised.
And I just want to put that out here on video today. And this is for all of those atheists out there who want to deny that Jesus Christ was an actual historical figure. You know, there are people out there that want to say that Jesus is a myth, that, we don't know for sure if he was an actual person and all that nonsense, okay?
Define what you mean by Jesus Christ. Because if you mean the biblical Jesus, the miracle-doing, rising from the dead man-God that you believe in, he is absolutely not real. There is no evidence that any of the extraordinary claims made about Jesus are actually true. Now, if you want to say that there was some itinerant preacher wandering around Palestine upon whom the trappings of godhood were posthumously draped, I might give you that, at least for the sake of argument. But that's not the Jesus you believe in. That Jesus never existed, as far as we can tell.
Well, I have some very interesting information. And here's what I found. And I'm just going to go ahead and share it with you right now. The question I had in my mind was, where did this whole Christ myth theory come from?
Oh, I don't know. Actual scholarship? Because you have to remember that a lot of the stories about Jesus are nothing at all new. There are other man-gods that came before him that were born of a virgin, that performed miracles, including some of the exact same miracles Jesus supposedly performed, who were executed and rose from the dead, etc. These are all things that the Jews at the time knew about and considered to be signs of divinity. So when constructing a new Messiah myth, it's only common sense that they would add on all of these well-known messianic myths. But let's see how Cornelius tries to ignore this.
Okay, well, I did a little digging and I found it. All right, so you guys can check this for yourself. But the Christ myth theory was actually started in the 18th century by a man named Charles Francis Dubois.
And that proves what exactly? Because you have to remember that prior to that time, Prior to the Enlightenment, daring to question religion, especially Christianity, could be a death sentence. Many other ideas critical of or unacceptable to Christianity also arose about the same time, including, evolution. This is the era where separation of church and state first started to gain traction, when philosophers like Spinoza and Moses Mendelssohn wanted to excise political powers from the churches and give people freedom from the tyranny of organized religion. It's not that people didn't think this before the Enlightenment, it's that they had no power to make their criticisms known.
Dupuis, if I'm pronouncing, hopefully I'm pronouncing his name right. Okay? So Charles Francis Dupuis, he was a French scientist, and he is the one who formally formed the Christ myth theory. And this happened in the 18th century. Okay, this is where all this stuff has all derived from the 18th century, from a French scientist named Charles Francis Dupuis.
No, it certainly isn't. This is where it was first able to be publicly voiced and debated, where the church couldn't come along and put him under house arrest for the rest of his life, or simply kill him outright for heresy. But I bet you didn't think about that, did you?
Now, here's my question for you, okay? I just got one question. How in the world is Charles Francis Dupuis in a better position, living in the 18th century, to tell us whether or not Jesus was a real person than the people who wrote about him in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd century?
Scholarship. I know that doesn't impress you, but it matters, because he looked at the mythology of Syria, Egypt, and Persia, among others, and discovered that pre-existing myths bore an uncanny resemblance to the claims made in the Bible about Jesus, almost as though they copied successful religious tropes from the past. And this kind of thing can be traced throughout the entire Bible. The story of Moses, for example, comes directly from the Syrian myth of Moses, which includes most of the same story elements like being sent down the Nile in a basket and being adopted by an Egyptian princess. The same goes for the flood tradition, which is drawn from many different pre-existing religious stories from around the region. This is how people operated at the time. We know this for a fact. We know that the very popular Roman tales of Mithra bear a very close resemblance to the early stories about Jesus. Mithra was born of a virgin, and his birth was attended by shepherds on December 25th. He had 12 disciples. He died and rose again from the dead after 3 days. Mithras' followers celebrated his resurrection on Easter. The list goes on and on and on. But while the religious want to pretend that it's all a coincidence, it's not. It's clear that early Christians borrowed elements from the Mithra myth and applied them to the story of Jesus.
Do you not realize that you will not find, prior to the 18th century, you will not find one piece of literature from a person that did not believe that Jesus was an actual figure?
That's not true. But as I said, when you had the church breathing down your neck, just waiting for someone to deny their doctrines so that they could kill them, that's hardly a surprise. But beyond that, so what? Even if it were true, that doesn't mean a thing. Nobody wrote about evolution before the 1800s either. That doesn't mean it isn't real. Nobody wrote about DNA before the 20th century. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. This is just religious wishful thinking based on faith, not facts.
Now, wow, take that to the bank, okay?
Not impressed, sorry. And I get why the religious would take something like that and be excited about it, because they're just trying to rationalize their way to their beliefs, not to find out what's actually true. So, because it supports what they already believe for emotional reasons, they cling to such claims without actually understanding the claims or the reasons behind them.
Now, you'll find people questioning whether or not Jesus was God. You'll find people questioning whether or not, he was the Messiah. But you will not find any writer, secular or Christian, okay? You will not find any writer, even the enemies of Christ. You will not find anyone question whether or not Jesus Christ was an actual historical figure prior to the 18th century.
And as I said, that's simply not true. But again, it depends on what you mean by Jesus. The very fact that people did, and he admits that they did, question the divinity of Jesus showed that they questioned the existence of the biblical Jesus. The biblical Jesus is indisputably divine. Take all of that away, and Jesus, some guy on the streets of Jerusalem, means nothing. The whole of salvation and forgiveness of sins goes into the waste bin of history. And that's why I keep pointing out that just having some guy named Jehoshua, which would have been his name before they Romanized it, that doesn't lend any credibility to your religious stories. Not at all.
Okay? So that's what I wanted to put out there. Why won't you find it? Because the people who lived in ancient times knew that Jesus was a real person.
Believed, not knew, believed. And when you have an all-powerful religious organization dedicated to keeping heretics quiet, or dead in many cases, it's no surprise that very few people opened their mouths and said that they thought it was all nonsense. But the second that it's possible to keep your head and reject these claims, people came out of the woodwork and did so.
So it's very hypocritical to charge people of hearsay in the 1st century and 3rd century, but you don't want to let's charge Charles Francis Dupuis with hearsay, okay?
Nobody is charging anyone with hearsay. They are saying that the only records we have from the supposed life of Jesus have been handed down by a church dedicated to keeping the myth alive and to wiping out all detractors. And I wish I could find the exact quote made by a pope in the Middle Ages where he said something along the lines that all heretical books have now been destroyed. If anybody can find that for me, I'd appreciate it. I used to know where it was and I lost it. In fact, the only reason we have some of the sources that we have, things the Catholic Church desperately tried to wipe out, is because of places like Ireland, which refused to follow the orders of the Church and saved them. There is no more destructive force than a group with unlimited power and an agenda. That describes Christianity for far too much of history.
Because this idea that Christ was a myth did not even start until the 18th century.
It wasn't publicly discussed until the 18th century. That doesn't mean no one had the idea. I'm sorry, are we supposed to be impressed with any of this?
So how in the world is that reliable information? That is information that has been passed down that started in the 18th century. This whole idea that Jesus was not an actual person. Any and every person who wrote literature about Christ in the early ancient times knew that he was an actual person. Okay?
And you're still wrong. But I guess I can stop saying it because it won't mean a thing to the blindly faithful. And he goes on to congratulate himself for a while, so I'm not going to bother. You can check it out at the link in the description if you want. See, I really don't care if there was some itinerant preacher that got the God treatment after he died, because that's not the Jesus described in the Bible. Now, J.K. Rowling based Professor Snape on a former teacher of hers, John Nettleship. The fact that John Nettleship was a real chemistry teacher does not mean that the character based on him was real. It doesn't prove that Snape could actually do magic. It doesn't prove that Hogwarts is real. This kind of argument doesn't get you anywhere when your real demand is that all of the mythic elements have to be true. Because the religious are really good at shifting their definitions as they see fit. And we see this all the time when they claim that atheists have faith, using one definition of the word, and then trying to pretend that it means something else. Here again, we see that they want to take some possible real person or persons and pretend that that means that their magical man-god was real. And it doesn't work that way. Even if everything Cornelius said is true, which it isn't, that doesn't get him any closer to the biblical version of Jesus. That formulation, that version, is still a complete myth, unsupported by any evidence whatsoever. And I think he knows it. He's just desperately trying to justify and rationalize his way from what might be true to what he believes is true without filling in any of the fiddly bits in the middle. And that's irrational. It just is.